This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jill Newbrunner, and here are the top stories from East Asia. Now, President Xi of Beijing says that China's ties with Malaysia are entering a golden new era as he continues a Southeast Asian diplomatic charm offensive. Beijing says it is not afraid to fight a trade war with Washington as it appoints a new trade negotiator in a surprise move amid an escalating tariff war between the world's two largest economies. Now, China's GDP expansion in the first quarter beats expectations even as major investment banks slash their growth forecast for Asia's number one economy. U.S. semiconductor giant Nvidia warns of a $5.5 billion write-down thanks to Washington's clampdown on AI chip exports to China. Japan dispatching its trade envoy to Washington, seeking a win-win deal in tariff negotiations. The close U.S. ally will be among the first countries to test President Trump's willingness to relent on his sweeping duties. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, Taiwan not spared from the Trump administration's tariffs despite close business ties. We examine the impact on the island's tech industry. And
the world needs more cooperation, not less. And we must not retreat into protectionism or isolationism.
Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong pushes for deeper regional cohesion and integration through ASEAN as the city-state seeks to navigate global uncertainties amid the US-China tariff war. Chinese President Xi Jinping touting stronger ties with Malaysia as he meets with Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim for talks in Putrajaya. Mr. Xi is on the second leg of his diplomatic blitz across Southeast Asia to counter mounting trade tensions from the US. Our leaders are seeking to bolster trade and expand collaboration in other areas, including artificial intelligence and green development. Mr. Xi earlier called for deeper political trust and high-level cooperation between nations. The visit comes at a pivotal time where Malaysia, the current chair of ASEAN, is hoping to stay neutral while navigating US tariffs. China, though, wants to position itself as a reliable partner to members of the bloc, which are among the hardest hit. Well, let's join Melissa Goh from Kuala Lumpur live. Mel, we spoke yesterday extensively about that slew of deals that are expected to be signed between the two countries. Update us on those.
We can expect a slew of MOUs and agreements that are going to be signed and witnessed by both Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim and President Xi Jinping. Now, more than 30 of them, I was told. Now, consider the fact that over 40 were signed in Hanoi, Vietnam, in the first leg of the Chinese president's three-nation Southeast Asian tour. It's no surprise that many will be signed here, too, at the end of this bilateral meeting. Now, President Xi is accompanied by his ministers, including Wang Yi, Chinese Foreign Minister, while Prime Minister Anwar is flanked by his cabinet minister, including Foreign Minister Muhammad Hassan and Trade Minister Zafar Aziz. Now, the meeting comes as countries around the world are facing sweeping tariffs from the US. Now, Southeast Asian countries are among the worst hit. Vietnam and Cambodia, in particular, slapped with over 40% tariffs, and Malaysia is not spared either, with 24%, although these tariffs have been suspended for 90 days. Now, what happened next is really anyone's guess, because the US is probing, even as we speak, on the semiconductors and pharmaceutical imports from countries like Malaysia. Now, although these are said to be exempted for now, we're not sure whether they will be slapped with 25% tariffs. Now, all these developments are unnerving, and all the, consistency, stability, these are the key, Prime Minister Anwar. That's why he's welcoming Mr. Xi to Malaysia to his official residence, Sri Perdana. Now, in his opening remark, he said that he can always count on President Xi as a trusted friend of Malaysia. While President Xi, in response at the bilateral meeting opening, said that China and Malaysia relations have been through many challenging times together and prevail from the Cold War era to COVID-19 pandemic to now the geopolitical uncertainty. So let's take a listen what both leaders had to say at the opening of this bilateral meeting in Putrajaya.
As a true friend tested, we will work together in various fields of endeavor, in economy, in trade, in investments, of course in the new technology, including AI initiative.
从新冠疫情艰难时期，两国的同舟共济，到今天，两国团结协作，共建命运共同体，中马关系正迎来新的黄金时代。
And Mel, with China making diplomatic advancements with Malaysia, can the ASEAN chair maintain its neutral stance without risking relations with the US?
You know, that's a tricky one because China is Malaysia's largest trading partner for 16 straight years. And naturally, Mr. Anwar is hoping that China will continue to buy more from Malaysia, not just palm oil, but also durians and other produce, and invest more in Malaysia. Now, Malaysia is among the first countries in Southeast Asia to support China's Belt Road initiatives. Now, they are talking about high-quality projects. Now, the East Coast Rail Link, remember, is now 80% completed and will be operational by January 2027, linking east and west coasts of Malaysia. Now, eventually completing this Pan-Asian rail network all the way to China. Digital, green economy, another area, as well as tourism, education to better strengthen people-to-people ties. Now, these are some of the key areas they're talking about enhanced cooperation here. Now, given that Malaysia is ASEAN chair for this year, they are also discussing ways to buffer the region, offset the impacts of tariffs, and secure the supply chains here. Of course, it's tricky because this comes at a time that South Asian countries are negotiating better terms for themselves with the US. Now, Mr. Anwar said that both China and Malaysia agreed, which is to uphold the multilateral trading system. Malaysia insists that it will trade with everyone, including both US and China.
All right, we leave it there. Melissa Goh, thank you, live from Kuala Lumpur. China has again slammed the US for initiating the current tariff war that has roiled international trade. Beijing called on Washington to stop exerting what it calls maximum pressure if it truly wants to resolve the issue through dialogue.
中方的立场一直很明确，关税战、贸易战没有赢家，中方不愿打，但也不怕打。如果美方真的想通过对话谈判解决问题， 就应该停止极限施压那一套，停止威胁讹诈，在平等、尊重、互惠的基础上同中方对话。
Trade tensions between China and the US have escalated sharply this month with no resolution in sight. Mr. Trump's reciprocal tariffs accelerated the tit-for-tat, pushing import taxes into triple digits, with the tariff rate on Chinese imports potentially reaching as high as 245%. Amid the tariff standoff, China has replaced its top negotiating official. The newly appointed trade representative Li Chenggang was China's former assistant commerce minister during Mr. Trump's first term. He is also a former representative to the World Trade Organization based in Geneva. Mr. Li replaces Vice Commerce Minister Wang Shouwen, who held the position since 2022. Japan's Economic Revitalization Minister Ryosei Akazawa is set to begin tariff negotiations with the Trump administration. He will be meeting the U.S. Treasury Secretary as well as the U.S. Trade Representative during his three-day visit to Washington.
プレゼント財務長官もそしてまたグリア代表もですね大変な親日家で知られている方たちです。また仕事の能力も本当に申し分のない折り紙付きの人たちですので信頼関係をしっかり築いて日本の国益にとっても 米国の国益にとっても、ウィンウィン関係になるような、いい交渉ができると思っています。
Japan will be among the first countries to start tariff negotiations with the US. Some analysts say the outcome could set the template for other countries seeking to strike a deal. And President Trump has imposed a 24% reciprocal tariff on Japan, despite it being one of the US's closest allies. Although granted a 90-day reprieve, the export-driven economy still faces a 10% baseline tax, plus 25% tariffs on steel, aluminium and cars. Japanese automakers are also scrambling to address the new levies. Honda has announced that it will shift some production from Japan to the US in June or July this year. The firm says the decision was based on policy since its foundation to produce cars where the demand is. The Nikkei newspaper says the company is aiming for 90% of cars sold in the US to be made in the US. Coming up on East Asia tonight, South Korea looks to avoid steep new tariffs as much as possible as it gears to cushion the blow from President Trump's threatened 25% levies. And we will speak to a guest to unpack China's latest GDP data as the economic environment becomes more complex and severe. Welcome back. It's that time in the show for our business news with Roland Lim. Now, Roland, China's economic growth in the first quarter outstripped expectations. So what kind of bearing has that had on investor confidence?
Jill, despite the strong showing, economists expect the economy to deteriorate due to the impact of U.S. tariffs. Now, China's economy expanded at a faster than expected pace at the start of the year, but it's facing a bumpy road ahead due to America's hefty tariffs. GDP expanded 5.4% in the first quarter on year, better than forecast in a Bloomberg survey. Now, for the month of March, retail sales gained 5.9%, the highest in more than a year, and largely beating economists' expectations. Industrial output expanded 7.7%, while fixed asset investment rose 4.2% in the first 3 months of the year. The unemployment rate for last month was also slightly lower. Now, the data covers the period before U.S. tariffs were increased exponentially this month. Analysts are forecasting that the world's second biggest economy will slow significantly in the months ahead, with some doubting the government's target of around 5%. Now, that's as tariffs as high as 145% on U.S. imports from China take effect. Markets are expecting China's central bank to lower rates or to cut the reserve requirement ratio to release more cash into the system. China has just appointed a new trade envoy as it pushes back against U.S. tariffs. Officials say Beijing will roll out more support to tide through the tough times.
从短期来看呢，就是美国加征高额关税会对我们国家的这个外贸和经济带来一定的压力但是改变不了中国经济持续长期向好的大势中国经济基础稳韧性
Tommy Xie, economist, head of Greater China Research at OCBC Bank, joins us live now to look beyond the headline GDP figures. Tommy, I want to talk more about the structural shifts taking place in China. I mean, China's strong Q1 GDP growth does mask a deeper pivot towards internal resilience as the trade war escalates with the US. Now, from your perspective, how credible or scalable is this policy shift towards domestic consumption?
Yes, you're right. If you look at the first quarter GDP, I think there's two major support really from the domestic demand front. I mean, for example, if you look at the retail sales, I think retail sales is really surprised on the upside. So we're talking about 4.6% year-on-year growth in the first quarter. So among this 4.6%, actually 1.4% is really came from the support from this trade-in program. I mean, for example, if you look at the sales of the communication equipment, for example, that's increasing by more than 26%. Even like furniture, we are seeing about 18% year-on-year growth. I think those are the sectors actually really targeted by the government consumption support schemes. So those really supporting some kind of the domestic demand story for now. So I think to some extent, we can argue the government policy are taking effect right now. So other than the retail sales, if we look at the investment, for example, as well, that's another angle of the domestic demand. So investment also doing quite okay, except for the property investment. So one of the bright spots from the first quarter is really the acceleration of the infrastructure investment, partially because of the issuance of the bond, because of the more financing support right now. So if you look at the infrastructure investment, that grew by about 5.8%. It's also a big pickup from only 4.something% in 2024. So if we add on the retail sales and the infrastructure investment, so that's setting the tone for the next few quarters, because that will be the key drivers for the Chinese economy for the next few quarters, in particular, given the weak support from the tariff kind of the uncertainty. So I think going forward, I guess domestic investment will be a very important sector to watch for.
Tommy, you mentioned direct subsidies, consumption vouchers, relaxed mortgage restrictions, now all in play. What's your take on how effective these tools will be in reshaping household behavior and boosting consumption?
Yes, it will help a bit, because when you receive the consumption voucher, when you see, oh, you can get 20% discount or even more, then of course, they may potentially incentivize some people to buy. So, I mean, based on the academic research for the past few years, we do see the multiply effect from this kind of a consumption voucher. But in the medium term, if we are thinking about from the structural perspective, I think that's not sufficient. Consumption voucher is more like setting the floor, right? You're buying more time for a more structural growth engine. So what matters eventually is still down to the job market, down to the income growth, income expectations, and even wealth effects. I think those are the very important factors. So far, we are still at the crossroads. We are still not quite sure how those factors perform going forward. So I mean, hopefully, we can see with more and more supports, we might see a stronger income expectation. But on the positive news side, in my opinion, because if you look at the government report, for example, for this year, it's the first time I think China to include property market as well as the equity market in the government report. I think that's a sign, we are going to see more support measures to boost, the asset appreciation, for example. I think that should be something, if happens, will be positive for the consumption story going forward.
Tariffs are now at 145% from the US side, 125% from China's side. How do you see China's industrial policy adapting? Will we be seeing deeper reforms around state-owned enterprises and market liberalization, or will central control still likely intensify?
Yes, I think for the tariff, so far, I think the tariff is between China and the US. Outside US, I mean, China is still doing the business as usual with ASEAN, with EU and other countries. So I guess from the government perspective, I think they need to come out some kind of the support measures to subsidize or to offset the impact of the loss of the export to the US. Those are more like a short-term perspective. But I think in the medium to the longer term, I think what's important for China is China still need to open the door to welcome the global investors, right? Because in the end, in order to counter the deglobalization, in fact, globalization is one of the ways to counter that. So I think how China can demonstrate to the world, I'm still the defender of the free economy, of the globalization. I think that's become very increasingly more and more important. I mean, hopefully, we can see more measures from China's side to demonstrate to the world regarding this further openness.
Yes, China clearly working to shore up ties with ASEAN and to rebuild its credibility with Europe, as well as position itself as a more stable partner. But do you see real traction here, or is China still struggling to overcome its coercive partner reputation?
Well, I think in the longer run, I think business is business, right? So I think, to me, we are seeing very strong integration between China and ASEAN. It's very difficult to be reversed, in my opinion, right? I know from the U.S. perspective, I guess they try to convince, lots of the ASEAN countries to diversify away from China's supply chain, China's economy, etc. I think in the way, I think it's understandable because it's one of the strategy maybe to try to isolate China from the U.S. perspective. But if you look at the data for the past few years, this integration has been too deep to be reversed, in my opinion. I mean, I can just share one data with you. I mean, you look at the China's goods surplus with ASEAN core region. We call it the ASEAN 6 economies, right? In particular, in terms of the machinery, in terms of the electrical equipment, etc. Before the first trade war in 2018, China is running the deficit with those countries. But however, now in 2024, which is last year, the trade surplus between China and ASEAN 6 has ballooned to 60 billion, only for those products like your machinery, your electrical equipment, etc. In the way we are seeing that this region is moving towards a bit like a core peripheral kind of the manufacturing model. China is producing the core components, where ASEAN is doing the other complement kind of the assembly or other part of the supply chain. So this is a very interesting changes we saw for the past 5 to 6 years. I think that may potentially continue to support the China's relationship with ASEAN from the economic perspective.
Perhaps still a silver lining for Chinese exports. Tom Misear, thank you for those insights. Tom Misear, economist, head of Greater China Research at OCBC Bank. Escalating trade war tensions overshadowing the positive GDP print. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index fell around 2%. Shanghai Composite managed to end slightly in the green, while the Shenzhen component ending the day nearly 1% in the red. Japan's Nikkei 225 fell for the first time this week as chip sector shares sank after Nvidia said that the U.S. government is limiting exports of its key chip to China. Chip testing equipment maker Advantest, that's Nvidia supplier, fell 6.6%. Chip making manufacturer Disco also tanking 8% today. South Korea's benchmark, the Kospi Index, closed down 1.2%. Nvidia's Korean suppliers, Samsung and SK Hynix, posing a drag on the broader shares. Meantime, Seoul says the country's finance minister will meet his U.S. counterpart to discuss trade issues as the semiconductor and auto export powerhouse seeks to avoid steep new tariffs. Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok said that his priority was to delay the tariffs, quote, as much as possible, while South Korea prepares to deal with the new tax regime. The country is a major exporter to the U.S. and chip makers such as Samsung, and car producers Hyundai and Kia would suffer from President Trump's threatened 25% levies. Now, to cushion the blow, South Korea has increased its extra budget by around $1.4 billion to nearly $8.5 billion.
저희가 오늘 아침에 12조 원 규모의 추경 저희 정부의 계획을 말씀을 드렸고요. 그 내용들은 지금 현재 당면한 그 현안을 해결하기 위하고 또 국회에서 신속히 통과가 가능한 그리고 또 정책 쟁점이 없는 내용들로 일단 시급한 게 속도입니다. 지금 어렵기 때문에.
And I'll be back a little later on with more business news.
We'll see you then. Thanks, Roland. Now, coming up on East Asia tonight, we examine how President Trump's tariffs have affected Taiwan's tech industry. Plus, criminal investigations into South Korea's former president continue, with police mounting a fresh raid on his office and security detail. You're with East Asia tonight. Here are the headlines we're following. Chinese President Xi Jinping touts stronger ties with Malaysia as he continues the second leg of his diplomatic blitz across Southeast Asia to counter mounting trade tensions from the US. Beijing warns Washington it is not afraid to fight a trade war, even as it reiterates that it does not seek one amid escalating tensions between the two countries. China's economy expanded at a faster than expected pace at the start of the year. The rise of 5.4% beat Bloomberg estimates, but the GDP is facing a bumpy road ahead due to America's hefty tariffs. The Wall Street Journal reports Mr. Trump's pressure campaign will shift to isolating Beijing. It says the U.S. plans to target more than 70 economies that are negotiating for lower reciprocal tariffs. It will apparently ask them to block China from using their territories for shipping goods and setting up Chinese firms, as well as not to absorb cheap Chinese industrial goods into their economies. Now, the aim is to force Beijing to negotiations with less leverage. President Trump also signaling potential new tariffs on all imports of critical minerals, setting the stage for yet another flashpoint with China. He has ordered a probe into supply chains and national security risks. China produces 2/3 of the 50 minerals considered critical in the U.S. Beijing recently banned some exports to America. Mr. Trump wants to boost domestic production and rely less on foreign suppliers. He has also been pressuring Ukraine for a deal to gain access to its minerals. 3 U.S. senators are visiting Taiwan this week as the world counts the costs of President Donald Trump's tariffs. Taipei still pushing ahead with negotiating when it comes to trade relations with Washington. The American delegation will engage in a series of high-level meetings with senior Taiwanese officials, including President William Lai, as part of a broader visit to the region. They will discuss regional security, trade and investment, among other issues. The island has close business ties with the world's largest economy, but did not escape Mr. Trump's levy wrath.
On April 7th, Taiwan's stock market suffered its biggest fall in history, with tech shares leading the plunge. It was the first trading day since U.S. President Donald Trump announced his Liberation Day tariffs. A 32% tariff was imposed on Taiwanese goods. That's a big deal for an export-reliant economy, where telecommunications and electronics account for 65% of Taiwan's exports to the U.S. Taiwanese tech bosses were in disbelief, as the move came shortly after TSMC committed to invest $100 billion in new U.S. chip plants, a gesture seen as deepening Taiwan-U.S. tech ties. Within days, President William Lai embarked on an island-wide tour, meeting with business leaders to provide reassurance. He's promised targeted support and warned against origin washing, where firms repackage Chinese goods as Taiwanese to dodge U.S. tariffs. Equally shocking, tariffs on Chinese goods are as high as 145%. That matters to Taiwan too, because many local firms manufacture from China. For instance, Foxconn's factories in China's Zhengzhou remain its most important manufacturing bases for Apple's iPhones. And AOU, one of the world's top panel makers, produce hundreds of millions of LCD displays each year at its factories in China. While Trump's trade war targets China, Taiwan's deeply integrated tech industry could become unintended collateral damage.
So let's take a deep dive into how the tariff war could impact Taiwan's tech industry with CNA's Victoria Jen joining us from Taipei. Victoria, you've been on the phone with all your contacts in the tech industry. What are they saying the impact might be?
Well, what I'm hearing is a mix of shock and urgency. One source said off record, it's like being punched in the face after offering a handshake. This especially after TSMC's $100 billion investment in the U.S. Another said Trump must be out of his mind. But publicly, major players are cautious. Companies like Acer and Asus told me that they're closely working with their clients to evaluate market strategies to minimize the impact. Some are looking to speed up shipment to the U.S. before the tariffs officially kick in. I'm also told that firms are doing whatever they can to get the goods out of China or Taiwan and into the U.S. within the 90-day grace period. Now, as a result, there has been a huge spike in air and sea shipments, and there's more uncertainty ahead since Trump is expected to announce his broader semiconductor tariff category, and that could bring yet another round of disruption. So for now, Taiwan's tech sector is in a frantic rush, flying and shipping out every unit they can while the window is still open.
And while this 90 days ticks down, how are the tech companies preparing for this new tariff reality?
Well, Taiwanese tech companies aren't just rushing out shipments. They're also preparing for a much bigger shift. Many now see this as the start of a major supply chain realignment. And the first priority is to get out of China. With U.S. tariffs on Chinese electronics expected to soar over 140%, staying put just isn't an option anymore. I'm told that even relocating to Vietnam or Thailand, where tariffs could still reach 40%, is still a better deal. Now, the second focus is building a footprint in America. Companies are increasingly seeing the need to produce directly in the U.S. It's not just about tariffs, of course. It's about securing future access to the U.S. market. I'm also hearing that Mexico could be a big winner as companies look for alternatives closer to the U.S. Now, let's hear what one market expert has to say.
美国跟加拿大跟墨西哥就是在对等关税之前，其实就已经这个谈定了，就是基本上是延续这个 Trump 的第一任任期的这个美国、墨西哥、加拿大的协定，就是这个 USMCA。那这个部分呢，你如果合规的话就是可以这个免税。那合规的话，包括说就是你的这个区域生产的价值，以及你在当地，你比如说你在墨西哥生产，是不是有做叫做这种实质的转型？实质转型，譬如说是你进去是一个铁块，出来是螺丝，所以它整个那个产品的这个形态是有改变。你要符合这些规则，才有办法说符合这个就是这个达到这个USMCA 的这个免税的协定，所以大家现在就是想办法，譬如说就是把本来没有在墨西哥厂投产的转品，如果是要符合美国市场，现在要转到墨西哥厂去生产，然后尽可能让它符合这个 USMCA 的免税的协定。
All right, so it sounds like moving out of China would be one of the big trends, but China is not just an important manufacturing base for many companies, also an important market. Would it be possible for companies to completely decouple from China?
That's right. Moving production out of China is one of the biggest shifts that we're seeing right now. But make no mistake, China is not just a huge factory, but also a massive consumer market. What I'm hearing is that some companies are now adopting a China for China strategy. Basically, that means if you want to keep selling to Chinese consumers, you will need to make your products in China using Chinese suppliers. Beijing, for its part, is shifting focus inward, trying to drive growth through domestic demand instead of exports. And now they're doing what they can to pull in foreign investment. If companies want a piece of the Chinese market, they will have to localize production on China's terms. Now, here's what the expert has to say.
所以我刚刚说就是3个这个供应链就是移转的主轴，第一个是移出中国，然后第二个是这个移入美国，然后第3个是中国自产这样子。所以这个可能一走就会走个这个好几年这样，因为你知道供应链转移可能要5到10年，甚至要高达10年以上才可能真的整个转移过去。那现在来说就是意图是这样，然后趋势是这样，只是看大家用多少时间来 implement 这样的转移的态势。
Victoria, I want to ask you about origin washing that Trump has been using as the rationale behind some of the hefty tariffs that he's imposed. What is the situation in Taiwan when it comes to origin washing, and are Taiwanese companies a big offender in this area?
Well, basically, what is Trump calls origin washing. It means that when goods made in China are being rerouted through a third market, lightly altered or simply repackaged and then falsely labeled as being made elsewhere to avoid U.S. duties. Industry sources tell me that while some cases have occurred here, Taiwan is not a major offender. In fact, the more serious cases are being traced back to Southeast Asia countries like Vietnam and Malaysia. But having said that, Taiwanese authorities aren't taking any chances. Both the government and the businesses are stepping up efforts to ensure compliance. And there's a clear understanding here that if Taiwan gets caught up in origin washing investigations, it risks not just penalties, but also damage to its hard-earned reputation as a trusted trade partner of the U.S. And for many companies, especially in the tech industry, that's a risk that they cannot afford to take.
All right, thanks for that update from Taiwan. CNA's Victoria Jin speaking to us from Taipei. Meanwhile, Hong Kong's Postal Service has taken action against President Trump's tariffs. Hong Kong Post says it will stop shipping goods bound for the U.S. The suspension for surface mail, also known as land or sea mail, takes effect immediately, while the one for air mail will start from the 27th of April. Parcels that have not been shipped out will be returned to customers together with a refund. The move comes after President Trump signed an order to scrap a duty-free exemption for low-valued parcels from China and Hong Kong. Hong Kong Post said it will definitely not collect any tariffs on behalf of the U.S. It accused Washington of, quote, bullying and abusively imposing tariffs. It also warned that people in the city should be prepared to pay exorbitant and unreasonable fees to send items to the U.S. South Korea and Vietnam say they will work closely to tackle the potential impact from recent trade tariffs, while deepening cooperation in the economy and other areas. Foreign ministers from the two countries met in Vietnam today to reaffirm ties. They're aiming to raise bilateral trade to $150 billion by 2030, in what Hanoi calls a, quote, balanced and sustainable way. Vietnam is urging South Korean firms to ramp up investment in infrastructure, electronics, semiconductors and renewables. South Korea is already one of Vietnam's top economic partners, with investments totaling $92 billion. Major players like Samsung and Hyundai have been steadily expanding their footprint in the country for years. The South Korean police have raided the office of former President Yoon Suk-yeol and his security detail as part of a criminal probe into the impeached leader. A special investigation team searched the secure phone server of the presidential office, the presidential residence complex, as well as the office of the Presidential Security Service, also known as PPS. The team was investigating allegations that acting PPS chief Kim Seong-hun had obstructed the execution of a detention warrant for Mr. Yoon earlier this year. Investigators were involved in a nearly 6-hour standoff with the ex-president's security detail back in January. The presidential security had also installed barbed wire and barricades at the presidential residence. This forced police officers and investigators to use ladders and scale perimeter walls to reach the building. Still to come on East Asia tonight, Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong pushes for deeper regional cohesion and integration through ASEAN as the country seeks to navigate global uncertainties amid the US-China tariff war. Hello again. Let's go to Singapore. Prime Minister Lawrence Wong says the country will push for deeper regional cohesion and integration through ASEAN. Speaking at a keynote event organised by the Singapore Foreign Affairs Ministry, Mr. Wong says the regional bloc remains central to the country's foreign policy, and he called on ASEAN to accelerate its integration efforts.
When Singapore takes over the ASEAN chair in 2027, which will also mark ASEAN's 60th anniversary, we will use the opportunity to deepen regional integration and ensure that ASEAN remains a vital and credible anchor for peace and prosperity in Asia.
And Mr. Wong adds that Singapore will strengthen its global network of partners and pursue greater collaboration to navigate a polarized world. He says the country is already plugged into major economic frameworks such as the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. But more can be done.
We must go further to reinforce the multilateral trading system and preserve open flows of trade and investment. Over the past week, I've spoken with counterparts from Malaysia, Japan, New Zealand, the UK, and the EU. We represent different countries across different regions, but we all agreed on one thing. The world needs more cooperation, not less. And we must not retreat into protectionism or isolationism.
And Roland Lim back with us for more business news. Over to you.
Thanks, Jill. Nvidia is expecting to take a $5.5 billion loss after the U.S. clamped down on its exports of AI chips to China. The move is Washington's latest bid to limit Beijing's access to advanced semiconductors as it seeks to maintain its edge in the AI race. The U.S. chipmaker says its H20 chip will now require a special license to sell to customers in China. This model is specifically tailored for Chinese companies to comply with existing restrictions which prevent Nvidia from selling its most powerful chips to Beijing. It was introduced last year under the Biden administration, and despite its reduced performance, the H20 still saw strong demand. Nvidia says the new trade barrier by Washington is required to deter the chip from being used in what they call a supercomputer in China. Meanwhile, sources close to the matter claim that Nvidia did not warn its major Chinese customers, even though it knew about the rules last week. Some firms were anticipating deliveries by year-end, as they were unaware of the new restrictions. Nvidia is not the only chipmaker hit hard by the new export requirements. Its closest competitor in the AI chip market, AMD, will also be subject to the latest move. Shares of both firms currently trading down in pre-market hours. The South Korean unit of General Motors has made plans to boost local production of its vehicles, easing concerns over a possible exit of the automaker in response to Washington's levies. According to the company's labor union, GM will be manufacturing about 9% more vehicles in its Incheon plant this year. The expanded production volume signaling an intent to maintain its South Korean base as an essential export hub. Now, 85% of GM Korea's exports go to the U.S., but they are being threatened by Trump's 25% tariffs on imported vehicles, as well as brewing uncertainty over further levies. Now, there was growing speculation that if GM Korea would follow other major automakers and shift production to the U.S. The American-based firm is known for brands like Chevrolet and GMC. As the trade war between the U.S. and China continues to threaten supply chains, a Chinese EV maker, XPeng, sees great potential for expansion in Hong Kong and Southeast Asia. CNA's Mei Wong spoke to XPeng's vice chairman and president, that's Dr. Koo, who is in Hong Kong to launch its flagship XPeng X9. She started out by asking how the company is coping with the tariff fallout between the two economic powerhouses.
We currently are not selling in North America, so the tariff between China and U.S. is not impacting our sales at the moment. And I believe that's probably true for most of the automakers because has not been the target market for the Chinese automotive industry. But that being said, I think the tariff will have an impact on the economy. It will have impact on the global supply chain. So some of the fact will be secondary. So we're actually doing a lot of work trying to understand what the impact is. But so far right now, it looks like it's minimal impact to our own business.
How are you preparing for further and even more volatility going forward?
Last year, we made a good success entering into new markets. over 30 in the world and has done very well. But I think going forward, we recognize that, especially with the recent sort of tariff talks around the world, you have to be very local. You have to really make your investments, be local brand, local service and sales practices, local team, and also in some core countries to have your own local production capabilities. And that's something I think we need to do as a company. But in general, I would say we're still very, very excited about the global opportunity.
But the EU as well has got tariffs on Chinese EV makers, and in fact 45% of EU tariffs are on Chinese EVs. EU says that they might go into negotiations with China to replace tariffs and set minimum prices for Chinese EVs. How is that going to affect your production and also your deliveries?
We always welcome advancement in discussion between trading partners between China and EU, for example. And any measure that we talked about that could potentially lower the entry barrier for our products, we really welcome that. And also, because our product is positioned as a premium brand, and also we actually have been selling well above, I would say, 40,000 euro in price. Actually, we're the #1 Chinese brand in that price category. I think the minimum pricing is something that we also are favorably monitoring. So we're definitely paying close attention to all these developments, but we're hopeful that there'll be solution or advancements between the country discussions.
Safety remains an issue among Chinese EVs. Can you talk about how you can reassure customers in that aspect?
We pay a lot of attention to safety. For example, our smart driving have a very, very strong safety aspect to it. Our battery technologies, it's actually, you probably never heard of bulletproof batteries. We actually can shoot 20 rounds at the battery pack without damaging and causing any reactions. So all of these safety features is something that we put in our car to make sure that it could be used with ease of mind.
Why do you see a lot more potential and opportunities in Hong Kong as well as in Southeast Asia?
Hong Kong is a very important market to us. Xpeng is based in Guangzhou. We're listed in Hong Kong. We're part of the Greater Bay Area family, so the significance of Hong Kong is very important. Also, Hong Kong is the gateway to the world. Southeast Asia, I think, is a very, very promising market for EV. In fact, last year, Southeast Asia is the only regional market outside of China that's growing faster than Chinese EV market. Some of the countries have seen tremendous growth in EV adoption, and some of the countries still early, so there's still a lot of room and potential to go.
K-dramas and K-movies have emerged as the second most watched content on Netflix worldwide. And that's largely thanks to standout offerings and the streaming company's investments into original Korean productions. According to analytics firm Ampere Analysis, K-content consistently makes up around 9% of global viewership on the streaming platform since 2023. Trails behind American content with a strong lead at nearly 60% of viewership and ahead of the UK and Japan. The report largely credited the global surge in Korean viewership to the release of Squid Game Season 2. The show racked up some 86 billion views, making it Netflix's most watched in the second half of last year, despite only being released just 6 days before the year ended. And that will do it for business, Jill.
All right, thank you so much, Roland. And from Roland and myself, that's it for East Asia Tonight this Wednesday. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget headlines anytime, CNN.Asia, Facebook and YouTube as well. Bye.